The late afternoon sun bled across the Arizona desert, painting the sky in hues of fire and ash. The hum of engines tore through the silence as a gang of bikers roared down a deserted highway, their laughter echoing in the open air. They were men without conscience, drifters bound only by a love of violence and mayhem. At the edge of a small town, they spotted their prey, a K-9 officer and his dog, patrolling near an old gas station. The officer, Detective Jake Mercer, had spent years on the force, and beside him was his loyal partner, Shadow, a Belgian Malinois trained for the toughest of assignments. Shadow was more than just a dog. He was Jake's shield, his weapon, and, above all, his best friend. The gang leader, a burly, tattooed man called Reaper, grinned wickedly as he revved his engine. "Let's have some fun, boys." The gang swarmed like vultures, surrounding Mercer and Shadow. Jake instinctively placed a hand on his holster, but before he could act, one of the bikers threw a metal chain, wrapping it around Shadow's legs. The dog yelped as he was yanked to the ground. "Back off," Jake barked, drawing his weapon. A gunshot rang out, not from his gun, but from one of the bikers. A searing pain exploded in Jake's shoulder, forcing him to his knees. The world blurred. All he could hear was Shadow's agonized whimper as Reaper brought a steel-toed boot down on the dog's ribs. Mercer fought against the pain, his rage building as the bikers laughed. "Leave him alone," he roared, struggling to stand. Reaper sneered. "Not so tough without your mutt, huh?" One last vicious kick sent Shadow sprawling, motionless. The gang sped off, their cruel laughter fading into the distance. Jake crawled to Shadow, pressing a shaking hand against his dog's fur. Shadow was alive, but barely. His breath was ragged, his body battered. Gritting his teeth, Jake pulled himself up, cradling Shadow in his arms. "I've got you, buddy," he whispered. The hunt begins. Shadow needed a vet, but Jake needed revenge. 3 hours later, after stabilizing Shadow at a nearby clinic, Jake returned to his truck. He bandaged his shoulder, grabbed his weapons, and checked the GPS on his dashboard. The bikers weren't ghosts. They had a base, a roadhouse known as the Devil's Den, hidden deep in the desert. Jake had been a soldier before he was a cop. He had fought in the deadliest corners of the world. And now, he was going hunting. As he approached the roadhouse under the cover of darkness, he saw their bikes lined up outside, their chrome glinting under the neon lights. The sound of raucous laughter and rock music spilled into the night. Jake moved like a phantom, cutting the power lines before slipping inside. The sudden darkness sent a ripple of confusion through the bar. Then, he made his presence known. A biker reached for a gun. Jake shot first. The man crumpled. Chaos erupted. Reaper and his men scrambled for weapons, but Jake was faster, more precise. He moved through them like a wraith, dispatching them one by one. A shattered knee here, a crushed windpipe there. And then, it was just Reaper left. The leader stared at Jake, eyes full of rage and fear. "You're insane." Jake leveled his gun at him. "You hurt my dog." Reaper lunged, a blade flashing in the dark, but Jake sidestepped, slamming his fist into the biker's jaw. Reaper staggered back, only to have Jake grab him by the collar and drive him through a table. The man groaned, coughing up blood. Jake pressed the barrel of his gun against Reaper's forehead. "No mercy," he growled. A single shot echoed in the night. The aftermath. Days later, Jake sat in the clinic beside Shadow. The dog's injuries were healing, his dark eyes full of trust and loyalty. "You're gonna be okay," Jake murmured, scratching behind his ears. Shadow let out a soft whine and licked Jake's hand. Justice had been served. And Jake knew that as long as they had each other, no one would ever hurt them again. The desert highway stretched endlessly under the late afternoon sun, heat waves rising from the asphalt. Detective Jake Mercer adjusted his sunglasses as he scanned the area. Beside him, Shadow, his Belgian Malinois, walked attentively, ears perked. They had patrolled this route countless times, but something felt off today. The distant rumble of engines confirmed Jake's unease. A gang of bikers, the Hell Reapers, was approaching fast. They were known for drugs, violence, and destruction, but lately, they had become bolder. Too bold. Jake rested a hand on his gun as the group closed in, their bikes kicking up dust. The leader, a towering man covered in tattoos with a shaved head and dark, soulless eyes, pulled up in front of Jake. "Afternoon, officer," the man sneered, lighting a cigarette. "Nice dog." Jake narrowed his eyes. "Move along." Another biker, a wiry man with a jagged scar down his cheek, chuckled. "Oh, we'll be moving. Just thought we'd stop and say hello." Jake didn't have time for games. I won't say it again. Reaper exhaled smoke and smirked. Boys. The ambush was swift. One biker swung a chain, wrapping it around Shadow's legs. The dog yelped as he was dragged down, struggling against the metal. Shadow. Jake reached for his weapon. Before he could react, a gunshot ripped through the air. Pain exploded in his shoulder as he staggered backward. Looks like the tough guy bleeds, one of the bikers sneered. Jake gritted his teeth, trying to stay upright. Let him go. Reaper tilted his head mockingly. Nah, I don't think so. He stepped toward Shadow, who growled despite the pain. With cruel amusement, Reaper raised his steel-toed boot and slammed it into Shadow's ribs. The dog yelped but didn't back down, baring his teeth. Jake roared in fury, but another blow sent Shadow sprawling, unmoving. The bikers laughed. Let's ride, boys, Reaper said, mounting his bike. Engines roared as they disappeared into the horizon, leaving Jake kneeling beside his fallen partner. His vision blurred with pain and rage, but he forced himself up. With trembling hands, he checked Shadow's pulse. It was weak, but still there. You're gonna be okay, he whispered. But someone else wasn't. Reaper and his men had no idea what they had just done. They had started a war. Jake drove to the nearest veterinarian, his truck speeding through the desert. Shadow was badly hurt, but he was strong. The vet assured Jake the dog would survive with rest and care. But rest wasn't in Jake's plans. His shoulder burned, the bandage barely holding back the blood, but his focus was razor-sharp. Years in the military had forged him into something more than a cop. He knew how to hunt, how to fight, and how to kill. He opened the glove compartment and pulled out a small notebook, the one he used to track criminal activities in the area. The Devil's Denver, a roadhouse deep in the desert. It was their hideout. Jake tightened his grip on his gun. He'd bring justice, but not the kind that came with handcuffs. Chapter 3. The Devil's Den. Night fell like a curtain, covering the desert in shadows. Jake moved swiftly, cutting the power to the roadhouse before slipping inside. The inside was packed with bikers drinking, laughing, unaware that death had just walked through their door. Jake took down the first man silently, snapping his neck with a brutal twist. Then chaos erupted. A biker spotted him and reached for his gun, but Jake was faster. A single shot took him down. Screams. Reaper's men scrambled for weapons, but Jake moved through them like a specter, disarming, breaking bones, ending lives. It wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. Blood pooled across the floor as Jake carved a path to his real target. Reaper. The gang leader stood at the back of the room, stunned. You've got some nerve. Jake leveled his gun at him. You hurt my dog. Reaper laughed. It was just a damn dog. Jake's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, Reaper lunged, knocking the gun away. The two men crashed into a table, fists flying. Jake's shoulder screamed in pain, but he didn't stop. He drove his elbow into Reaper's ribs, then followed with a brutal knee to the face. Reaper spit blood and grinned. That all you got? Jake didn't answer. He grabbed a broken beer bottle from the floor and slammed it into Reaper's leg. The gang leader howled, dropping to one knee. Jake picked up his gun and pressed the barrel to Reaper's forehead. You should have killed me when you had the chance, Reaper hissed. Jake didn't hesitate. A single gunshot echoed through the desert. Chapter 4. Shadow's Revenge. 2 weeks later, Jake sat in the vet clinic, watching as Shadow slowly recovered. The dog lifted his head and licked Jake's hand, his dark eyes still fierce despite the scars. You did good, boy, Jake murmured. We're not done yet. There were still bikers out there. More scum that needed to be wiped from the earth. Jake looked at Shadow, then at the road ahead. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Jake Mercer stood outside the vet clinic, a cigarette burning between his fingers. He didn't usually smoke, but tonight was different. The past 2 weeks had been a blur of pain, rage, and bloodshed. Shadow lay beside him, resting but alert, his wounds healing. The dog had survived a brutal beating, but he still had fire in his eyes. Jake exhaled slowly. Reaper was dead. The Devil's Den was in ruins. But something gnawed at him. The Hell Reapers weren't finished. Killing their leader wouldn't be the end. It was just the beginning. Jake knew the rules of war. You kill one, 10 more come looking. And they wouldn't just be hunting him. They'd be hunting Shadow, too. His phone buzzed. It was Captain Briggs, his superior at the precinct. You've been real quiet, Mercer, Briggs said. His voice was low, cautious. Should I be worried? Jake took a long drag before answering. I handled it. A pause. Then, you handled it, huh? Another pause. I need you back on duty. But first, you should know. We intercepted some chatter. The Hell Reapers have a new leader. Guy goes by Vulture. Jake crushed the cigarette under his boot. Where? Briggs hesitated. Don't do this, Mercer. Where? Briggs sighed. They're regrouping in an old industrial complex outside Tucson. But listen to me, damn it. This isn't your fight anymore. Let the department handle it. But it was his fight. Jake hung up. He looked down at Shadow, who was watching him with knowing eyes. Looks like we're not done, Jake muttered. Shadow gave a low growl, as if he understood. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. Jake's truck rumbled down the dark desert road. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, ears perked, body tense. He was still healing, but Jake knew the dog wouldn't sit this one out. The industrial complex loomed ahead, an old steel factory, abandoned for years. The Reapers had taken it as their new home. Jake parked a mile away and moved in on foot. His shoulder ached, but he pushed through the pain. Shadow stayed low beside him, his breathing steady. Inside, the bikers were drinking, celebrating something. Jake slipped through the shadows, taking in the scene. Then he saw him. Vulture. A tall, wiry man with a snake-like grin, standing in the center of the room, laughing. His voice carried over the noise. That bastard Mercer thought he could kill us all. But we're still here. And guess what? We're coming for him. We're coming for his dog. The room erupted in cheers. Jake's blood turned to ice. They wanted Shadow? His grip tightened on his pistol. No. They would never touch him again. Jake took a deep breath. He counted the men 15. He had one pistol, one knife, and a dog still recovering from his last fight. Didn't matter. He'd taken down worse. He reached into his vest, pulled out a small metal canister, and rolled it across the floor. The flashbang exploded. Screams. Confusion. Jake moved. The first biker barely had time to turn before Jake's knife found his throat. The second one reached for his gun too slow. Jake put a bullet between his eyes. Shadow lunged, his jaws locking around a man's wrist, crushing bone. Chaos erupted. Vulture scrambled back, shouting orders, but his men were dropping fast. Jake took cover behind a rusted metal crate, reloading. He felt something wet on his side, his stitches had torn open. Didn't matter. He peeked out, found his next target, and fired. One by one, they fell, until only one remained. Vulture. The coward was trying to escape through a back door. Jake whistled. Shadow, bloody but unyielding, took off like a bullet. Vulture barely had time to react before Shadow slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. Jake walked up slowly, his pistol aimed. Vulture groaned, clutching his arm where Shadow had ripped into him. Why, you're insane. Jake crouched down, gripping Vulture's collar. His voice was low. Dangerous. You threatened my dog. Vulture's eyes widened in terror. Wait. Jake didn't wait. The gunshot echoed through the factory. Vulture slumped. It was over. Jake exhaled, his hand shaking slightly as he looked down at Shadow. The dog sat beside him, panting, but alive. Jake knelt, running a hand through Shadow's fur. We did it, buddy. Shadow licked his hand, as if to say, we always do. The Hell Reapers were gone. For good this time. Jake looked at the horizon. The first light of dawn was breaking. No more running. No more war. Just him and Shadow. Together. Forever.